not a man, he's a monster. How could he do that? Then I realised that his wife and his daughter was sitting behind me. Both blonde hair, the same as Melanie.
Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome or welcome back. I'm uploading daily until the end of the year, so make sure that you're subscribed and your notifications are turned on. We have a live chat every single day when the videos drop at 7 PM UK time, so I'll see you there. Thank you so much to all of my patrons. If your name is on screen right now, then you're a legend. Our love and respect goes out to everyone that knew and loved Melanie. Melanie Road was a happy teenager, one with an incredibly bright future ahead of her. She was born on September the 29th, 1966, to Jean and Anthony Road in Bath, Somerset, UK. Melanie was the youngest of three siblings. She was the baby of the family. However, her older brother Adrian and older sister Karen described her as the intelligent one. Her mother described her as being a child who had her head screwed on, and it seems that she did. Melanie excelled in just about everything that she did. She was the deputy head girl at school and she seemed well liked by everyone. The 17-year-old was at a pivotal point in her life. She was making plans for the future and it seemed she had big dreams. While some teenagers are tempted away from academic pursuits when they get their first taste of freedom, Melanie realised the value of her education and wanted to make something of herself. She understood balance. While she studied hard, she made plenty of time for her friends and boyfriend too. She loved music and was said to have never argued with anyone. Her peers described her as bubbly, as did her family and neighbours. With everyone having such warm opinions of her, the shocking details of the brutality she would endure would come as a real blow to those who knew her, as well as the wider community and the country. The straight-A student had been working very hard with her close-knit circle of students. She was just about to sit her A-level exams, with plans to study in the field of archaeology. But Melanie would never sit these exams, nor would she become the archaeologist that she dreamed of becoming. There was only so much preparation you can do when it comes to studies, and so Melanie was persuaded into celebrating the end of the term. It was Friday, June 8th, 1984, and that night she, her boyfriend, along with a few friends, headed out to the Beau Nash nightclub to let their hair down before the A-level exams began the following Monday. Melanie's mother remembered dropping her off at the club. She remembered her bright and bubbly girl had made a smart comment about how the club had rolled the red carpet out especially for her. Unknowingly, this would be the final thing that Mother Jean ever heard her daughter say. The group enjoyed themselves. They drank, danced and laughed the night away. As time drew on, they all left together before separating en route to see themselves home. It was a walk that Melanie had made many times before, and although her boyfriend did ask if she wanted him to call her a taxi, fearless Melanie declined. She had often taken the route alone and Bath was indeed a safe town. She had no reason to believe that the walk this night would be any different. Melanie almost made it home to her family that Friday. She powered through the half-hour walk and was just 200 meters from her house. But she would make it no further. In the early hours of Saturday, June the 9th, Melanie's promising future was snuffed out. Her final moments were described as lengthy and brutal. It would later be revealed that the fair-haired teenager had bravely fought back despite the ferocity aimed towards her, but to no avail. As dawn came, her lifeless body, described as mannequin-like, was sadly discovered by a little boy helping his father deliver milk. He came upon a trail of red DNA on St. Stephen's Road. This trail led to a cul-de-sac just a 3-minute walk from Melanie's home. The crime scene was a grisly one and must have left a mark on those who discovered it. 999 was quickly called and police put a striped tent over the area to shield the public from the barbaric sight. The body that greeted officers that morning bore 26 separate wounds, all around 4 inches deep. Most of them were to the soft tissue area of her chest. Melanie had been jabbed at through her clothing, but it soon became obvious that the clothing had been removed, but then replaced while her attacker atrociously violated her, gratifying only himself. Her undergarments were found a little further afield later on. The spatter at the scene told them that she had been attacked while standing initially, and then chased around the corner before being brutally laid into. For the officers at the scene, securing the area, shielding the public, and of course identification of the body was a priority. Not far from where she lay lifeless were her house keys. On them was a wooden keyring bearing the name Melanie. With nothing else to go on, police took to slowly driving around the surrounding streets. They simply asked, "Does anyone know Melanie?" with a megaphone. Mother Jean and Father Tony had awoken that morning to discover their daughter's bed was empty. They were both rightly feeling a little worried, but nothing could have prepared them for the bitter reality that they would soon have to face. Hearing the name Melanie muffling through the mechanical sounding amplifier as the police slowly drove around their neighbourhood meant that panic quickly set in. Jean frantically flagged down the vehicle driving by. She told them their daughter Melanie had not arrived home the night before. It was then that her world was shattered forever. She was initially spared the ruthless details of the heinous crime, but she couldn't avoid it forever as it was about to circulate throughout the town. But the harsh truth was, their daughter wasn't coming home. With a monster on the loose capable of such a merciless act, and plenty of evidence at the scene of the crime, the force began a manhunt which they dubbed Operation Rhodium. DNA found at the scene matched just 3% of the population, a rare DNA that helped narrow down suspects considerably. But what would follow were years upon years of dead ends. Between 1984 and 1989, 94 suspects were arrested through Operation Rhodium on suspicion of Melanie's case. Frustratingly though, every single one was ruled out. Sadly, the forensic capabilities of the 1980s were nowhere near today's standards, and so Melanie's case appeared to be destined to become a cold one, like countless others. Mother Jean resigned herself to the fact that Melanie's killer may never be brought to justice for his wicked deeds. She believed the Road family would never get the closure that they so deserved.
We are hoping for success on another case that's remained unsolved for decades. The rape and murder of a teenager, 17-year-old Melanie Road. For a quarter of a century, Melanie's family have had to live with the knowledge that her killer has never been caught. Can you bring them some comfort by naming him tonight?
In 2009, 25 years after the night of Melanie's attack, a Crime Watch special aired with a reenactment of Melanie's final movements that fateful night, her route from the nightclub, and her savage demise. Melanie's case didn't just make it to TV by chance. 2009 was the year that 41-year-old single mother of three, Detective Sergeant Julia McKay, had been assigned to cold cases. The detective had given 20 years to the force, but she was rarely promoted because of what she described as internal workplace misogyny. She shared how in her previous role, when she was assigned to burglaries, a co-worker had remarked, "What will you do when you catch a burglar? He's ironing?" The attitude she faced from colleagues in the workplace only drove her to be more determined in her approach to work. Once she was assigned to cold cases, which more often than not remained unsolved, and then stumbled upon Melanie's case, she took note of how much paperwork had been gathered and the enormous efforts of Operation Rhodium, and felt in her gut that this may be solvable. With not much more than a hunch, she visited Mother Jean, unaware of the supportive mother-to-mother relationship that would blossom between the two of them. Jean had been on an emotional rollercoaster for 25 years. She divorced from husband Tony, who had since succumbed to Alzheimer's disease. He no longer lived in the home. She didn't have much hope that Melanie's killer would ever be found at this point. She was concerned that Detective Sergeant Julie McKay was just one of many who had tried and failed to find the man responsible. In fact, Jean's hopes had been raised for nothing several times previously. Once when a national database began in 1995 and again in 2000, when a new DNA profile of the killer had emerged from forensic advancements. The monster's profile, however, was now much more detailed. prompting a cold case team to be set up in 2003. Julie made no promises to the woman in front of her. She was honest from the get-go, telling her she was working on nothing but a gut feeling, but she did believe that he could be found. The 25-year anniversary Crime Watch appeal was hit and miss. Televised calls for help tend to bring out a lot of bad leads, with some people just wanting their 5 minutes of fame, and with a case so old, many genuine memories of the night in question were likely to be foggy at best. And annoyingly, none of the 72 new leads generated from the broadcast were of any use at all. However, Julie was unconcerned. She knew that breakthroughs are being made all the time in cold cases. That is, since the birth of the national database. Melanie's killer had left so much evidence at the scene of the crime, his bodily fluids were everywhere. Melanie had fought back. The killer had also been stabbed during the initial struggle, and this DNA had been swabbed. Police had been looking for familial DNA matches since the early 2000s. In 2010, the familial database was funded and updated. There were now 400 possible family members found the second time around, and they were investigated to see if they had anyone in their lives that would match the callous killer's profile. However, it would be another 5 long years before Julie found what she was looking for. It would appear that a year before, in an area of Bath, not far from Melanie's family, a 41-year-old woman had been processed after she broke a necklace during an altercation with a boyfriend. The woman, Claire Hampton, had been cautioned and released, but the DNA that had been taken from her during that arrest had recently been added to the database.
If a relative is arrested, and it has to be a close relative, the clever scientists can say, this person's DNA is so similar to your crime scene, there is a likelihood that it's one of their relatives. And you get a list. So we applied for that and we got our list again. And his daughter was at the top of that list. So we went and swabbed him.
In a stroke of luck for Detective McKay, Claire Hampton was what they refer to as a screamer, a familial DNA match that compares so heavily that it screams direct relative. They issued a warrant to collect DNA samples from her living relatives. The cold case team learned that she had a father, a man who fit the age profile, and who had lived in Melanie's area during the time that the atrocity occurred. Not much else of the profile fit though. To a passerby, her father, Christopher Hampton, seemed very ordinary. He was reportedly a good parent in a loving marriage, and he still worked as a painter-decorator despite his advancing years. However, when police took his swab, which the man gave calmly, willingly, and without emotion, the DNA profile was identical to that recovered on a 17-year-old's body more than 30 years earlier. In finding her match, Julie promptly arrested the then 63-year-old on suspicion of murder on July 3rd, 2015. When the police came for his arrest, his puzzled second wife said, "I'll see you later," to which her cold-hearted husband chillingly replied, "No, you won't." Hampton refused to comment during questioning, and in a pre-prepared statement, he had the audacity to deny any involvement. This man had managed to deceive the world for 3 decades. His wife and children would soon learn of his true nature and the horrific things that had happened at his hands. Those who knew the man had nothing bad to say about him, but it turns out they didn't know much about him at all. To have violated and mutilated a young woman, and then to have gone on and played happy families for so long, didn't sit well with criminal psychologists. The man really had fooled all of them, but with the advancements made over the 31-year period, his involvement as a culprit was undeniable. The case went to trial. Hampton eventually pleaded guilty and was near silent throughout. As a matter of fact, he appeared completely emotionless, even during the harrowing details of what he had done, as well as the emotional contents of the family's impact statements.
I always said if I got hold of him, I'd strangle him or stick a knife into him, and that's how I felt, but I wouldn't even use my energy up on him. I feel that he should be shut up in a dungeon like they used to in the olden days and just left to rot, because he's not worth looking after. I know that's against the law, but I can think that. I'm allowed to think that.
It may have taken 31 years, But thanks to huge efforts taken in the 80s to record the crime scene along with modern-day forensics, Melanie's monstrous killer was finally behind bars, where he belonged. Christopher Hampton was sentenced to a minimum term of 22 years. On the morning of January the 11th, 1992, two brothers sat in their car. They were driving towards a popular hunting spot that they visited in Madison, Indiana. While this drive was nothing new to them, they spotted something that they did not expect to see on the side of the road. A kind of strange object that they couldn't quite make out. Pulling the car over, the two exited the vehicle, and their hearts dropped. This was not a strange object at all. It was the burned remains of someone. The police were called at 10:55 a.m., where an investigation was immediately launched. Melinda Loveless was a 16-year-old girl from New Albany, and she struggled with her home life. She witnessed her father putting her mother through endless torment, resulting in her mother repeatedly attempting to end her own time on this earth, and this spread throughout her childhood years. With her parents' ultimate divorce, Melinda did her best to establish a circle of friends who could support her. Laurie Tackett was a 17-year-old girl. She had childhood experiences very similar to Melinda, growing up in Madison, Indiana, with parents who allegedly maltreated her. 15-year-old Hope Rippey, whilst more mild than the other two, also experienced a turbulent relationship with her parents amid their divorce, connecting with Melinda and Laurie in their teenage years. Tony Lawrence, who was friends with Rippey since childhood, had struggled after experiencing an attack by a boy in the neighborhood as a child. She too found solace in a group of friends. Shanda Sharer was born in Pineville, Kentucky in 1979, ultimately moving to New Albany after her parents divorced. Whilst there, she joined the girls' basketball team and she seemed to be thriving. New Albany is located along the Ohio River in the Midwestern area of the United States, which was historically known for steamboating and as a center for supplies and medical aid during the Civil War. Now, as a major city in Indiana, it has revitalized its downtown scene where each of these girls would call home. In 1990, Melinda Loveless began dating Amanda Heverin. Both of the girls were 14 years old at the time. Despite the young love between them, it was difficult for Amanda to get close to Melinda. It was said that Melinda had consistently displayed erratic behavior, and she struggled to maintain healthy relationships. It was about a year later when Amanda met Shanda at middle school, but it wasn't on good terms. The two of them had gotten into a physical altercation. Since both of them were apparently to blame for the incident, Amanda and Shanda were placed in detention that day. And whilst there, they actually began to talk and get to know each other. Amanda was confused at the interaction, as was Shanda, as they both realised that they could actually be good friends instead of enemies. Deciding to squash the tension between them, Amanda and Shanda became friends. They would send letters back and forth to each other, where they would plan special outings. Amanda had even asked Shanda to come with her to a school dance. Although there did seem to be a romantic tone to their relationship, at that age it wasn't seen to be anything serious. Remember that at this time, Shanda was 12 years old. As the relationship between Amanda and Shanda developed, Melinda became increasingly jealous, unable to contain the anger that rose within her at the thought of her girlfriend spending significant time with someone else. Remember, Melinda and Amanda were an item. Upon hearing that Amanda had asked Shanda to come to the school dance with her, Melinda decided to show up to the event to find Shanda and to confront her. Shanda had no idea what was coming for her. As she was casually dancing, she was met with angry screams of Amanda's girlfriend. Not quite knowing how to respond, Amanda and Shanda both assured Melinda that they were just friends, leaving Melinda utterly dissatisfied and the situation unsettled. In retaliation, Melinda decided to do her best to hurt Amanda for taking her friend Shanda to the dance by getting revenge. She began dating another girl without ever officially breaking up with Amanda. Amanda did her best to battle with the erratic behavior that Melinda was demonstrating, trying to continue her relationship with Shanda as normal. Later that same month, Amanda and Shanda decided to attend a music festival together, and this threw Melinda into an uncontrollable rage. Melinda began to threaten Shanda in public. making her nervous about what Melinda may do. Since she was only 12, Shanda's parents were concerned for her well-being and her involvement in what seemed to be a toxic relationship between two older teenagers. They decided for Shanda's safety that they would transfer her to a new school, hoping that this would remove her from the drama. But despite removing Shanda from the situation, Melinda couldn't shake the sense of betrayal that she felt from both Shanda and Amanda, spending her days boiling away, plotting what she could do to Shanda to get back at her. On the night of January the 10th, 1992, Melinda met up with her friends Laurie, Tony and Hope at her house, ready for a fun girls' night. Melinda talked with her friends about the events that had been going on between her, Amanda and Shanda, what we as adults see as silly teenage drama that hopefully they would simply forget about by early adulthood. But Melinda couldn't let it go, saying that she wanted to go to Shanda's house and scare her out of spending any more time with Amanda. Stopping at McDonald's to ask for directions, the four girls arrived at Shanda's dad's house in Jeffersonville with a plan to scare her out of ever bothering Melinda or Amanda again. Shanda sat downstairs watching TV after her dad and stepmother had gone to bed, enjoying the final hours of the night before she would go to bed as well, when she heard a knock on the door. Standing outside her front door were two teenage girls that she did not recognize. They asked if Shanda was home. She obviously replied that she was Shanda, but with a feeling of confusion looming inside. The two girls introduced themselves as Hope and Tony, friends of Amanda, calming Shanda's anxiousness at this interaction. The two explained that they were on their way to go and hang out with Amanda at an ominous location named the Witch's Castle. This was an abandoned stone house nearby. Shanda was reluctant to leave with these strangers, explaining that she was still busy until later on that evening. The four older girls then left and attended a music show, returning at around 12:30 a.m. to retrieve Shanda for a second time. This time it was Laurie and Hope who knocked on the door to retrieve Shanda. While still reluctant, Shanda decided to change her clothes and to go with them. This was the opportunity to spend time with Amanda and her new friends. As Shanda got into the back seat of the car, excited to spend a night out with some new friends, her heart stopped as Melinda jumped out from under a blanket. She was wielding a sharp weapon and held it to her throat. Shanda struggled to respond as Melinda interrogated her, pushing for details about her relationship with Amanda. In reality, she was still a little girl, trapped in a situation that she couldn't escape. Once they arrived at the Witch's Castle, Melinda and Laurie pulled Shanda out of the car. Shanda sobbed uncontrollably. Melinda taunted her whilst wielding the weapon that she'd brought along, threatening to harm her with it and laughing about it with Laurie. The group of girls pushed the situation even further. They tied Shanda's arms and legs with rope. Shanda screamed in fright as she tried to grasp what was actually happening. Remember her age at this time. This is absolutely unthinkable. As Melinda and Laurie continued to taunt Shanda with their plans to harm her, the other two girls acted as if it was a normal night out, dancing to music and hanging out. At some point, Laurie feared that passing cars may spot them, so they decided to leave for another location. Shanda begged for them to release her, as Laurie drove the car to a patch of woods near her house, continuing to relentlessly instill fear into Shanda. With Tony and Hope staying in the car, out of their own fear about how the night had turned into a horror film, Melinda and Laurie brought Shanda to an abandoned building inside the woods. It was here that the true torture began. The two girls used their fists and weapons, leaving Shanda with multiple puncture wounds, slashes and bruises across her body. Finally, as Shanda begged for her life, the two girls used a rope to throttle her until she fell unconscious. They dragged her back to the car and placed her in the trunk. The two girls informed Tony and Hope that Shanda's life had ended. Returning to Laurie's house as if nothing had happened, the four girls drank soda, played games, and listened intently as Laurie told them their future using crystals. At about 3 a.m, Hope and Tony stayed behind, as Laurie and Melinda decided to go back out, country cruising. During this country cruise, they heard the familiar sounds from hours earlier. It was the cries of Shanda emanating from the trunk of the car. Laurie, with no ounce of mercy, stopped the vehicle. She opened the trunk and finished the job using a tire iron. She struck Shanda until silence fell over their remote country road. Instead of feeling any ounce of sorrow for what they had done, Melinda and Laurie joked with eagerness about the pure evil that they had just committed. Just before the sun rose on the morning of January the 11th, Laurie and Melinda returned to the house to wake up the other two girls, telling Laurie's mother that it was time to drive them home. Unknowingly to the parent, Shanda still lay in the trunk of the car. Laurie and Melinda beamed as they told the other two girls the story of what they had done to Shanda just hours before. The four girls stopped at a gas station where they bought a bottle of Pepsi, then emptying it out and filling it with gasoline. They then travelled to a nearby road and stopped alongside a field. Laurie and Hope exited the car. They then wrapped Shanda in a blanket, and Hope poured the gasoline from the Pepsi bottle all over her body. The two lit Shanda's body on fire, quickly fleeing the scene. A few minutes later, Melinda was not convinced that the fire had worked, so they returned once again to pour more gasoline on Shanda. The four girls then went to breakfast at a nearby McDonald's. It was there they laughed and joked about the state of Shanda's body, callously joking about her burns looking similar to the sausage that they were eating. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, Shanda's father and stepmother were in a state of panic. They could not find any sign of Shanda. Last thing they knew, they left her downstairs watching TV whilst they went to bed. Filing a missing persons report, they waited to hear of any news of where Shanda may be. It didn't take long for Hope and Tony to be overcome with guilt about what had occurred over the past 24 hours. By 8 p.m. that night, the two travelled to the police station, giving almost unintelligible statements between their sobbing. After investigators struggled to get any real usable information, they gained the names of Melinda and Laurie, as well as the location of Shanda's body. Since the location was in a different county than where they had lived, officers had to call the police department from the other county, where they were quickly able to match the story the girls had told with the missing persons report from a few hours before. It didn't take long for detectives to identify the unrecognizable body of Shanda Sharer, having to use her dental records. It was almost unfathomable that this type of horror could be committed by teenage girls, by people posing as friends. Shanda's family left devastated. A later autopsy revealed that both times Shanda was set on fire, she was still alive. Due to the brutality and complete lack of remorse by some for what had occurred, all four of the girls were tried as adults for their hand in the homicide of Shanda. Laurie Tackett and Melinda Loveless were sentenced to 60 years in prison, while Hope Rippey ultimately received 35 years and Tony Lawrence received 20 years. Despite these sentences, Tony Lawrence was released on December 14, 2000. She remained on parole until 2002. Hope Rippey was released on April 28, 2006, and she served parole until 2011. Laurie Tackett was released on January 11, 2018, on the 26th anniversary of what she had done to Shanda. Melinda Loveless, the jealous mastermind behind this operation, was released on September 5, 2019, and she is still serving parole. Shanda's father passed away due to complications relating to alcoholism in 2005. Shanda's mother and younger sister still struggle to this day, battling with the reality of the events that had occurred, a task made even harder by the fact that all of them have now been released from prison. Appearing on a Dr. Phil show, the two recounted their lack of belief that these four girls could ever be rehabilitated, or capable of feeling remorse for the absolute evil that they committed.
As the police know themselves, and you yourselves know, well, I was in Luton taking the kids to the pictures. I was a bit of a womaniser, but that's all.
It wasn't me, and I had nothing to do with it. I have not paid anybody. I have not done it.
This case spans an unbelievable 40 years. It exposes the very darkest of human nature. What follows is one of the most twisting cases I have ever covered. This is Dark Case Documentaries. Carol Morgan was born on the 26th of December 1944. She had two children, Dean and Jane, with her husband Richard Curtis. The family lived together in Swindon, England, UK. Carol was a devoted mother besotted with her children, and she was also a loving wife. Still though, despite her best efforts, her marriage to Richard was rocky and they subsequently divorced. Carol remained with her children in the family home, and Richard's involvement in their lives eventually dwindled. As a result, Carol began seeking support at an organisation for single parents called Gingerbread. The organisation seeks to help single parents with financial, emotional, and practical needs through their helpline and community outreach. It was through Gingerbread that Carol met a man named Alan Morgan, a man 5 years younger than her. Alan's affiliation with the organisation is kind of unclear. However, not long after meeting, the two started dating, and by 1977, 5 years after her divorce from Richard, the new couple were married. They appeared happy, and Alan moved into Carol's family home with her and the children. She was excited for her life to start all over again. In December of 1979, Carol and Alan bought a small corner shop that was situated at 51 Finch Crescent in Linslade, Bedfordshire, and so the family relocated, moving into the flat above the shop. They called the shop Morgan's Store. The business was bought using Carol's share from the sale of the house, and partly from a business loan procured in life insurance surety between both Alan and Carol. Carol was immediately very well liked in the village, and she'd been described as friendly, thoughtful, and warm. Many of her neighbours considered her an especially good mother. Unfortunately though, not everything was going well. The business was struggling, presumably due to its location and the type of goods being sold, and just a year later, the family was described as living hand to mouth. This dream of a new life had quickly turned into a nightmare. The Morgans' accountant at the time stated that he was concerned that sufficient income was not being generated for the family. In addition, Jane, Carol's daughter, recalled several checks bouncing when payments to suppliers had to be made. In the UK, we have a saying for situations like this: you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. To make matters worse, it was around this time that Alan began having an affair with a woman named Margaret Spooner. Many believe that Margaret was only one of Alan's many lovers, and even he has described himself as a womanizer. Carol learned of the affair when Margaret's husband, Michael, confronted Alan at the shop, threatening him and insisting he end the affair. Carol was shattered and heartbroken, but nonetheless, she seemed determined to make her marriage work. In some small way, it seems she blamed herself. By August 1981, several months after learning of the affair, Carol confided in her uncle. She said that things were getting better in her marriage and stated that her and Alan were now being intimate again. This was significant to her as prior to August, their relationship had grown distant, cold, and lacking in physical contact. In addition, on the 11th of August 1981, Carol visited the Citizens Advice Bureau for support with the couple's marital problems. She had even scheduled a session with a marital guidance counsellor for the 18th of August 1981. However, Carol would never get the chance to try to make her marriage good again. On the 13th of August 1981, just 2 days after visiting the Citizens Advice Bureau, at around 5 p.m, Alan took both of his stepchildren, Dean and Jane, to the Odeon Cinema in Luton, about half an hour from where they lived. He stated that they deserved a treat for helping in the shop, and that going to see a movie would be a small but fun reward for their hard work. However, this meant that Carol was alone in the corner shop for the evening. Upon returning home from the cinema at around 10:30 that night, Alan sent the children upstairs immediately, and then he entered the shop. It was there he found Carol, brutally hacked to death, in the storeroom. Alan then called the police. They arrived promptly and entered the crime scene. Police indeed found Carol in the storeroom and deduced that she had been working there when she was attacked. She had been bludgeoned with a sharp object, an item they thought was either a sickle or a machete. However, no weapon was found. Superintendent Brian Prickett stated that the murder was the worst attack he'd seen on a human being. 2 fingerprints were found atop one of the freezers. Yet, most of the crime scene was relatively bare. Not much evidence to be found. Finally, they discovered that around £500, along with multiple boxes of cigarettes, were missing, suggesting that the motive of the attack was robbery. The murder prompted a massive investigation, all under the leadership of Superintendent Brian Prickett. The village was left in complete shock. Subsequently, 1,204 suspects were interviewed, fingerprints were checked, and over 600 witness statements were taken, all in an attempt to piece together the incident and track down the killer. On the fateful night at around 7 p.m, multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a man walking down the street from the corner shop. They stated that he was carrying 2 plastic bags, and they saw him getting into a dark green estate car. As a result, nearly 30,000 vehicles were checked. The suspect was identified by witnesses as being between 17 and 20 years old. Tracking the man down would not be an easy task. The building's layout allowed for 2 entrances into the corner shop, one from the street and one from the flat. Whilst there were several eyewitnesses of the man leaving the shop, no one saw him entering. Police therefore suspected that the man may have had access to the flat, entering from above. Still, despite the mass investigation, the police were unable to secure any evidence that was not circumstantial. There had been several attacks and murders of a similar nature, all on female shopkeepers in recent months, and police feared that they may have a serial attacker or a possible serial killer on their hands. In April 1981, Susan Sheen was attacked in the shop that she owned, sustaining several cuts to the head by a sharp, heavy object. Thankfully, she recovered, but did not identify her attacker. The following year, in January 1982, another incident took place. Dora Pratt, who was 76 at the time, was attacked in her flat above her shop in Ipswich. She was found unconscious by a police constable, having sustained blows to her head, and around £200 was missing from the shop. She regained consciousness in hospital, describing the attacker as a young man, aged about 20, with silver-rimmed glasses. Unfortunately, Dora did pass as a result of the injuries sustained in the attack, and her investigation eventually went cold. Carol's investigation, however, was still underway, although it wasn't promising. Still, Superintendent Prickett became convinced that they were missing something crucial, and so he turned his attention to Carol's husband, Alan. Prickett claims that he had initially suspected Alan, but the husband's alibi was airtight. He was at the cinema with his stepkids, and of course there was that tie-in with the other shopkeeper attacks. However, Alan began giving interviews to the press, and it was there that he was coming across as arrogant, and he was actually seeming to enjoy the attention.
There's quite a few other people who won't shop here because they're afraid of being caught up in the gossip.
What are they saying about you?
It's been found that I killed my wife. And as the police know themselves, and you yourselves know, well, I was in Luton, taking the kids to the pictures.
What grounds do they think they've got for saying that?
Well, because I was happy-go-lucky, I suppose. I was a bit of a womaniser, but that's all. That's the only reason.
How did the death of your wife affect you?
Affect me? Well, I closed the business for 7 weeks while the police were investigating it. I lost a lot of stock throughout, and I've had to sell the business now at a loss. The kids are all right, but I think myself and the kids think that it'd be better to get away because it's their future. They've got to live with a shadow over them all the time.
Are the police any nearer, in fact, catching the person that did kill your wife?
Well, they're saying they are because they're eliminating people all the time. So they must be nearer to catching the person.
If ever they do catch the killer, will you come back here?
I don't know. It all depends. I'd like to get hold of the killer though. That's what I'd come back for.
He also showed no indications of remorse or grief for what had happened to Carol. In fact, one of the reporters who interviewed him later admitted to feeling suspicious about him, attributing his doubts to Alan's unusual responses and steely demeanour. He also moved in with his mistress, Margaret Spooner, soon after Carol's death. Superintendent then recalled that on the night of Carol's death, Alan seemed unusually calm and displayed no signs of upset despite the death of his wife. He also noted that it was suspicious that Alan had sent his children upstairs immediately once they arrived home without saying goodnight to their mother, suggesting that he may have known what he was about to uncover and did not want them to find their mother's body. Many of the community members also noted that it was strange for Alan to have taken the children to the cinema in the first place. They stated that he never spent time with them alone, and certainly was not known to treat them. Prickett began to believe that this was Alan's way of ensuring his cast Alan alibi, and not just a fun night out. In addition, officers discovered that Alan had withdrawn a large sum of money the night before the attack, and made a large order of cigarettes a few nights before the incident. They also knew that it was likely that the killer had access to the flat, and that, in lieu of witnesses seeing him outside, he must have entered the shop from upstairs. Finally, law enforcement also became aware of the fact that a few months before her murder, Carol had changed her will, leaving everything to Alan. By this stage, Superintendent Prickett believed Alan was involved in his wife's murder. He suspected that Alan had paid the attacker and conspired to kill his wife for her life insurance and his inheritance so that he could start a new life with his mistress. However, all of this evidence was again deemed circumstantial. All that Prickett had was a hunch, so Alan was never charged. Instead, the case went cold. 40 years passed and it was now 2018. Cold case investigator Detective Superintendent Carl Foster, along with his team, began reviewing cases. And Carol Morgan's case stood out. They started by re-interviewing every living witness who was interviewed in 1981. The process of reviving Carol's case was painstaking, but Superintendent Foster had a hunch they could crack the case. 3 years later, in 2021, Jane Bunting would make a startling revelation. Detective Superintendent Foster stated that when he knocked on Jane's door, she opened it and then said, "I've been waiting for you to come visit me for 40 years. Jane revealed that when she was 17, Alan approached her in a pub and discussed the various ways that he might kill his wife. She claimed that he said he hates Carol and doesn't want to be married to her. She says he also stated that he wished she were dead, and wouldn't an accident be nice? Furthermore, Alan asked Jane whether her boyfriend at the time, who had previously been in jail, may be willing to help. Jane stated that she was shocked and appalled, and she left the pub immediately.
It wasn't me, and I had nothing to do with it.
And you had a new woman that you moved in with, yeah?
With Margaret, Ken.
And I say new, someone that you'd already been having sex with. But now you could carry on a relationship with her without any complications at all.
The
You said the police weren't looking as you have been involved in this at all.
nuns, got anything to that? I don't know.
But you, after Carol's funeral, you just carried on, never went back to the cemetery, is that right?
No, don't say I ever do.
So how did you know that the murder wasn't in the holiday? So why send the kids upstairs?
Both.
How do you know the murder's not upstairs? There's no Jack by the kids downstairs. Those disappeared. So why send them upstairs?
Because Pepper got in the bed. I don't know.
Is it because you knew nobody was there?
No.
You knew this was going to happen,
No.
and you knew they'd already gone.
What?
The plan was they would lock up behind them. You'd give them a key.
What's that?
Was this the monkey?
No.
You tell it.
I'm telling you now. No. I have not paid anybody. I have not done it.
Finally, in 2024, Alan Morgan was tried in Luton Crown Court for the murder of his wife, Carol Morgan. With Jane Bunting's testimony, prosecutors felt their case was strong, and along with other testimonies and witness statements, they brought forward the evidence that was previously deemed merely circumstantial. In court, the original lead detective on the case, Superintendent Prickett, stated he was very grateful that Jane had come forward and propelled the case, because he had been unable to shake the investigation from his mind, calling it a thorn in his side. He states that he always knew Alan was guilty, but he simply couldn't prove it. He also stated that, unfortunately, he doesn't feel he could have done anything differently, and that Jane's statement was simply the missing piece. Pamela Smith, Carol's cousin, gave a victim impact statement during the trial, describing the horror that befell Carol's parents, who were absolutely crushed by the event. Margaret Spooner, Alan's mistress, was also charged because prosecutors suggested that she knew about the plot. Tapes played during the trial revealed Alan shushing Margaret in a police van for fear of being recorded. He also wrote her a letter on the year of the murder, indicating that he desperately needed her trust. Carol's children were left motherless and spent the majority of their young lives raised by their stepfather and his mistress. Alan kept the children away from their grandparents, who had already suffered the loss of their only child. All of this time, Alan lived most of his adult life free, and he was financially secure due to Carol's life insurance and the money he received from Carol's recently altered will. Detective Superintendent Carl Foster suggested that Carol was effectively erased from all memory, including those of her own 2 children who have grown up without their mother, being raised by the man responsible for her death. After an exhaustive 2-month trial, the jury broke away and deliberated. Margaret Spooner was cleared of all charges. However, Alan Morgan was found guilty for conspiring in the murder of his wife, Carol Morgan. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in prison. Alan Morgan is 74, and he will presumably spend the rest of his life locked up. He, however, maintains his innocence. On one side, justice has been served, but now it seems far too late. Not to mention the fact that the killer, if alive, is still out there. Alan Morgan is the only person who knows his identity, and I wouldn't hold your breath. Gavin Smith was a Hollywood insider, living the high life as a studio executive, but one night he vanished without a trace, leaving behind more questions than answers. Was it a calculated disappearance to escape from reality, or something far more sinister? This is a story of a man whose secrets may have cost him everything. Gavin Smith was the ultimate Californian man. He was rugged, tanned, with sandy blonde hair. His brother Greg described him as being the type of guy that all the girls wanted and all the guys wanted to be. He was a natural athlete and stood at over 6 feet tall, making him a natural fit for basketball. In college, his interest in the sport deepened and he was selected for the UCLA team, under the guidance of the legendary college basketball coach John Wooden. The team won the 1975 NCAA championship. Thereafter, he played for the University of Hawaii, where he set, and still holds, the school's single-season scoring record of 23. That is 4 points per game. Overall, he was well liked by his teammates. He was known to bring his dog along to games, and he was considered positive, talented, and dedicated. However, when Gavin was not drafted to play professionally for the NBA, he was devastated and even spent a few days by himself in the mountains to cope. After some reflection, he moved back to California, feeling slightly deflated but ready to move on. He decided now to try his hand at acting, and he landed a few bit parts in films such as Glitz and Swinging in the Painter's Room. Still, the acting work alone was not financially viable, so he also started working as a stuntman. On the set of the well-known television series Remington Steele, he suffered a very serious back injury that left him out of work, and eventually this led him to an opioid dependency. As a result, he started waiting tables, and it was around this time that he met his wife, Lisa. Lisa and Gavin had a whirlwind love affair and fell for each other instantly. Only after a few months, they were married, and shortly after that, Lisa was pregnant. They then had 3 boys together in rapid succession. Lisa's brother Ed described the couple's connection as instant chemistry and instantly in love. He also stated that Gavin's family was the center of his universe and he devoted his time to his kids. Things were going well for Gavin in his personal life, and soon his professional career also started to gain momentum. However, it was not in front of the camera as he initially thought. Gavin spent some time working as a caddy at a well-to-do golf club and was soon rubbing shoulders with movie executives. He was extremely affable and driven, and after impressing an executive, he landed a low-level job at 20th Century Fox. He quickly worked his way up the ranks with a can-do attitude, claiming he could learn everything he needed to in 6 months, and learn it better than the people around him. And that he did. After a few years of picture-perfect California living, the family underwent some struggles. Despite Gavin's flashy job, the weight of the housing crisis, and a tendency to live beyond their means left the family in a precarious financial position. In addition, Gavin's addiction to pain medication worsened drastically during this time, and he was left with no choice but to check himself into rehab. At first, the family believed that rehab would be the key to addressing their issues, but in reality, things only seemed to get worse and worse. Shandrika Creech was a beautiful young woman in her early 30s, and she had checked into the same rehab facility as Gavin to tackle her own issues with alcoholism. Gavin led one of the group sessions that Shandrika took part in, and they became fast friends, and then lovers. Shandrika, however, was also married, so there was a lot of people out there that, if this secret came out, would be very hurt and very angry. Shandrika's husband, John Creech, was a dealer known for having a violent temper and for being abusive. He had previously been charged with an offence for storing large amounts of illicit substances in the couple's home. He pled no contest and admitted to being a middleman. After the extramarital lovers left rehab, they stopped seeing each other for several reasons. Firstly, wife Lisa had found out about the affair, and the couple was now trying to save their marriage. Ultimately, Gavin's affair was boiled down to just another element of his midlife crisis. Supposedly, it was around the time of the affair that Gavin started working out even more than he already did, and started dressing like a 20-year-old to go to rehab meetings. Still, the couple managed to sort things out, and they even went on a romantic getaway to Hawaii. However, there was another reason that the affair may have simmered down. After John, Shandrika's husband, saw some text messages from Gavin on her phone, he visited Gavin while he was still in rehab, and there he allegedly threatened Gavin, insisting that he stay away from Shandrika. John also viciously attacked his partner after he learned of the affair. It is very possible that this may have been the real reason that Gavin and Shandrika went their separate ways. However, about a year later, in 2010, Shandrika started emailing Gavin, and the two rekindled their love affair, at the very least by correspondence. Again, John found the emails and this time was increasingly furious. He emailed Gavin saying, "I'm going to get you, Gavin. Your wife is getting a copy of these emails. You're f***ed, you old prick." Gavin confessed about the emails to Lisa. He told her that John was a violent dealer and that he had been threatening him. Subsequently, they decided to change Gavin's phone number and email address, hoping this would be enough to put an end to this whole thing, but probably knowing that it wasn't. On December the 7th, 2010, Lisa tried to take control of the situation. She drove to John and Shandrika's home, and disturbingly, she did it with her oldest son Evan and her youngest son Austin. Then she sent the boys to ask John to back off, so that they could try to keep their family intact. The boys knocked on the door and John answered. According to Shandrika, she never saw them because they stayed at the door, but she could hear them talking and crying from inside. The boys apologized on behalf of their family, and Austin was heard saying, "I'm only in 8th grade. I'm too young to lose my dad." Lisa's controversial, insanely risky plan seemed to work. Although John told the boys that he had been having their father followed, and that he knew where the family lived, worked, and went to school, he also told them that by coming there, they had saved their father's life. John then added that so long as Gavin kept away from Shandrika, he would leave Gavin alone. For about 2 years, Gavin and Shandrika ceased communication, and they continued to live their separate lives. However, in 2012, Shandrika found out that John was having an affair with an 18-year-old high school girl. She found text messages on John's phone that read, "I don't want to come off as that guy, you know, the older perv or something." Another message read, "I like you because of you, not your age," along with many others. As a result, the couple separated, but they continued living in the same house due to financial reasons. Around the same time, Lisa discovered that Gavin was not only back in communication with Shandrika, but that he had also been seeing another woman from rehab named Melanie. At this point, Lisa was understandably devastated. She'd always believed that she was the love of Gavin's life, but still, Gavin decided to leave the family. He went to stay with a friend and continued on with seeing Shandrika. It's unclear whether he was still seeing Melanie or for how long their relationship went on, but either way, the damage was done. In April of that year, when Gavin picked Shandrika up while she was walking her dog, John was following her, and when he saw her get into Gavin's car, he started yelling and running towards them. However, on this occasion, Gavin was able to drive off before John reached them. Then on the evening of May the 1st at around 10 p.m, Gavin called Shandrika and asked her to meet. She agreed and told him to meet her at a parking lot, somewhere that she knew would be private. Shandrika was still living with John, as well as with her grandmother, and so the couple needed to meet in secret, even though they were both now officially separated. Shandrika left the house and told both John and her grandmother's caretaker that she was leaving. John told her that if she left, he would have someone to follow her. But Shandrika was no longer taking orders from her husband, partly because he was also having an affair. She ignored him and left the house at around 11 p.m. She arrived at the parking lot to find Gavin waiting for her in his black Mercedes. She left her phone in her car, an Audi, and then got into Gavin's car. What she did not know was that John had activated a tracking service on her phone, so he knew exactly where she was. John then arrived at the parking lot. He was driving Shandrika's grandmother's car, a gold Mazda. He found his ex-partner and Gavin in a compromising position. According to Shandrika's testimony, John began beating Gavin with his fists, while she yelled and begged for him to stop. It was not until Shandrika mentioned that John would go to jail that he stopped, but then turned his anger towards her. Shandrika managed to escape from the Mercedes. She got into her own car and quickly drove home. She closed the front door, grabbed a sharp implement, and then told her grandmother's caregiver that John was going to end her. John arrived home and was allegedly now in a calmer state, but he was covered in a thick red liquid. He told Shandrika that she needed to drive him back to the parking lot because Gavin needed to be taken to the hospital. The next day, Gavin was meant to pick his sons up from school, but the father never arrived. Word got back to Lisa and she immediately contacted the police. Despite their marital problems, Lisa knew that Gavin was devoted to their sons, and he just would not miss a pickup. The police dismissed Lisa's concerns though, and despite the family's best efforts, Gavin's disappearance would remain shrouded in mystery for 10 months. In early 2013, Gavin's black Mercedes was discovered in a police bus in a storage unit that belonged to none other than John Creech. The car was covered in both Gavin and John's DNA, and this included some of Gavin's vital fluids. Lisa and her family were broken, especially because they'd suspected foul play from the outset. Lisa was quoted as saying, "My sons and I are devastated, and this has been the hardest 10.5 months of our life, being without him." John was named the prime suspect in the investigation. He was already in prison serving an 8-year illicit substance charge, allegedly on the night of Gavin's demise. When Shandrika drove John back to the parking lot, she waited for him a few blocks away because she could not bear to see Gavin in whatever state he might be in after the attack. From there, whilst it is unclear whether Gavin was no longer alive at this point, at the time he arrived back, John called a friend and claimed that they needed to talk. When John arrived at his friend's house, he was in Gavin's Mercedes wearing a white tank top, a top that he had turned inside out as it was covered in red vital fluids. They then drove to the friend's parents' house where John began cleaning the inside of the car. He then called a second friend and subsequently stored the Mercedes at his house for around a month. This friend stated that he knew there was a body in the trunk at that time. After John told Shandrika that Gavin had died, they burned their clothes from the night of the incident in the fireplace. Shandrika claimed that she was afraid, and that when she told John to call the police, he threatened her. Finally, John moved the car to a storage unit, one that was rented for him by Shandrika's grandmother's caretaker. The caretaker admitted that she knew that John needed a place to hide Gavin's car, and that the reason was that he had ended his life on that night. For 2 years, 4 accomplices and John Creech were the only people who knew exactly what had happened to Gavin Smith, all while his family reeled in agony. Yet another year later on October 26, 2014, a group of hikers finally stumbled upon Gavin's remains. They were buried in a shallow grave in the Angeles National Forest. While the family finally had closure, John was only charged in 2017. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 11 years in prison. After the verdict, Lisa collapsed, heartbroken, as a jury stated that he wholeheartedly believed that John did not intend to kill Gavin on that night. According to testimony from the trial, several accomplices, including Chandrika, were given immunity for testifying against John Creech and for helping to piece together the events of that evening. Not everyone is lucky enough to experience it, but when it's given, a mother's love should be cherished. It's something that you can rely on to make you feel safe and warm. But sometimes through life, things do go wrong, and love just isn't enough to hold a broken mind together. And when things shatter, they shatter into a million pieces, never to be put together again. Anna Leovic was born in 1999 in Komrat, Moldova, to her mother Paraskovia Leovic and her father Vasily Aladov. He was a wealthy landowner turned politician who had aspirations for the governorship of Komrat. He's been described as controversial, ruthless, and quick to anger and violence. Anna spent most of her formative years in Moldova, but she did not live with her father. Shortly after she was conceived, Paraskovia and Vasily split. Paraskovia was a medical student and only 19 years old at the time Anna was conceived. The relationship just didn't last. Vasily started another family and eventually had a son, but he still remained in his daughter's life. Between Vasily and Paraskovia, Anna didn't want for much and she grew up with a great deal of independence. When she was 18, her mother moved to Germany for work, but Anna didn't follow. By that point, Anna already had her own apartment, and she was attending a private college. It was around this time that Anna started posting on Instagram and to other social media sites. Like other young people her age, Anna longed for the attention and status of having a large social media presence. In the beginning, her posts didn't really gain much traction, but over time, she learned from other girls on the site. She would post risque photos. She posed with big-name clothing brands and accessories, and flaunted the affluent lifestyle her father's money had afforded her. She even went as far as undergoing cosmetic surgeries to further her goal of becoming a social media influencer. She eventually amassed a following of 9,400 people on Instagram. By the time Anna turned 21, she was following in her mother's footsteps. She enrolled in medical school where she was a model student, according to her teachers. Her academic performance remained unaffected by her new fast lifestyle, which had recently grown to include illicit substances. And now with no parent to reel her in, Anna quickly became addicted to these substances in 2019 and persisted with the self-destructive habit up until 2020. Her lifestyle of partying and substances came to a screeching halt when a life-threatening accident put her in the hospital, and this drew the attention of her concerned mother. In regards to where Anna came from, Komrat is a city and municipality in Moldova, and it's the capital of the autonomous region of Gagozia. It's located in the south of the country and has a modest population of 20,000 people. It was in this city that Anna lived while she was attending medical school, and it was where her mother returned to after hearing about the accident. In late November of 2020, Anna found herself at a private party. There she drank and used substances like she had done dozens of times before. But something went wrong this time around. She overdosed during the party and ended up in the emergency room. Her family was alerted, as is routine, and her mother now properly learned of her daughter's substance issues. Up until that point, no one knew that Anna was out of control yet again. In her teenage years, she did have a problem with alcohol, an addiction that Mother Paraskovia thought she'd helped her overcome with the help of a psychologist. It shattered the mother when she learned that her daughter had been using illicit substances for over a year without her noticing. It was even more painful because of her history with alcohol. It became apparent to the mother that all of this independence and all of the distance that she'd given to Anna had left her in a vulnerable position rather than strengthening her. She knew that Anna could not fight for her sobriety on her own. She realised that an intervention, as late as it was the only way to help her gain control once again. She feared for her daughter's safety, feared for her daughter's future, if she continued down this same path. She was a stellar medical student, well on her way to completing her education and to becoming a doctor. Another repeat of November could put an end to that dream, or to her life. So she arranged for a detox clinic and flew to Moldova to talk to her daughter that she had only seen a few times that year. She reached Moldova on December the 11th, 2020, and arrived at her daughter's apartment at 6:26 p.m. She found Anna drunk and high on substances. An argument broke out between the mother and daughter. The mother demanded that Anna put a stop to her substance use, but Anna flat out refused. Given the levels of freedom, reputation and control she'd previously had over her life, it now seemed absurd that her mother would try to give her orders. While the mother and daughter were actually close, Paraskovia had been abroad for years, and it felt like she had hardly any grounds to tell her daughter what to do. When Paraskovia saw that there was no reasoning with Anna, she told her about the detox she signed her up for without her consent. Anna's reaction surpassed what the mother or anyone would have predicted. Anna grabbed a sharp kitchen implement and swiped it at her mother. It left her almost helpless on the floor, but Anna's attack did not stop there. The wound that was started with the sharp implement was now pried open with Anna's bare hands. She ripped out her heart, lungs and intestines, while her mother was still breathing. She used her newly learned medical knowledge to devastating effect. Paraskovia, unsurprisingly, passed, her final moments stunned and petrified in the unbelievable pain that her own daughter could do this. Anna dropped the organs that she'd removed in the trash like it was the most normal thing in the world. She then hopped in a shower to clean off the red. She styled her hair, got a fresh change of clothes, and left her apartment with her mother's body lying on the floor. Her destination was the apartment of her then boyfriend in Comrat. On arrival, Anna demanded champagne. Her boyfriend fulfilled her requests, and much later in the evening, she calmly, almost casually mentioned to him that she'd ended her mother's life. The boyfriend obviously thought she was lying, but when she was less than forthcoming with the details, he became curious and kept the rest of his questions to himself, perhaps to keep himself safe. Later that night, after Anna was asleep, the boyfriend slipped out and travelled over to her apartment to satisfy his curiosity. The door opened to a scene from a nightmare. Anna's boyfriend then placed a call to the police, and when they arrived 2 hours later at 10:13 p.m, they were shocked by the brutality laid out in front of them. Paraskovia's organs were indeed found in the trash, exactly where Anna dumped them. It's unclear whether the police actually found the weapon, the sharp kitchen implement. However, they gathered enough evidence to arrest Anna as a chief suspect of the crime. When the police arrived at her boyfriend's apartment to arrest her, Anna had disappeared. They eventually managed to arrest her 72 hours later at a friend's house. Anna was taken into custody and sent to a local prison, where she stayed for 30 days until the date of her arraignment. While all of the evidence pointed towards Anna as the obvious perpetrator of the murder, the police still chased down other leads because they thought the motivation seemed insufficient, given the extremely grisly nature of the crime. Anna's uncle Vladimir, who was interviewed about the event, spoke of the relationship between their mother and daughter. This was a very good family. Paraskovia loved her daughter so much, and she spent as much time with her as she could. It took only 2 hours for the police to tell me Anna was the main suspect. I could never imagine this. And indeed, the threat of a rehabilitation centre hardly seemed like sufficient motivation for extreme actions like this. Anna had no previous history with law enforcement or violence, even during her addiction. It seems like even when she was using, she was still highly functioning, able somewhat to balance her social life with her responsibilities at medical school. Anna's father was also questioned about the crime. Given his many controversies and history, was it possible that he had something to do with it? Perhaps Anna had met some bad people through her father, and through her addiction she owed them some money. Or maybe one of Vasily's rivals targeted Paraskovia to get to him. There were even theories that Vasily himself might have done the deed. However, they were quickly put to rest, as he had an alibi when the murder had occurred. Try as they might, the police were unable to identify any other suspects in the murder of Paraskovia Leovic. Anna was going to have to stand trial, and the evidence was not in her favour. When news broke of Anna's arrest and the crime that she was suspected of committing, the country, and indeed the world, was stunned. A local newspaper reported, citing the police, she stabbed her mother with a knife and then cut out the heart of a living woman. It's hard to believe, but she cut out her heart in the most literal sense. After her arrest, Anna refused to cooperate with law enforcement and exhibited inappropriate and incomprehensible behaviour in prison and at her arraignment. While her fate hung in the balance, Anna seemed more preoccupied with her nails. She lay down on a defendant's bench, picking at her hands, even as the judge addressed her. At another moment, she stood on the defendant's bench, holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign. As she was being led out of the court, a journalist asked her if she had killed her mother. Anna replied with a creepy laugh and said goodbye. After the hearing, Anna's lawyers sought to declare her incompetent to stand trial. By this stage, she had clearly not exhibited any remorse or emotion since her arrest. Since she also seemed to be entirely unaware of what was happening around her, her defense argued that she was clearly experiencing some sort of mental episode. And after several psychiatric evaluations, Anna's lawyers succeeded and was absolved of all criminal responsibility for the murder of her own mother. The judge did not release her back into the general public though, as the incident with her mother had proved she was a danger to society. She was sent to a high-security psychiatric hospital in September of 2021 instead. There she'll hopefully receive the help that she needs, and may one day become well enough to reintegrate into society once again, although it is quite unlikely. Anna's dormant social media account gained 5,000 more followers in the months after her sentencing before it was eventually deleted. However, some of her posts have been archived by other users. She was dubbed the Monster of Moldova, and, in a way, she gained the fame that it seemed she wanted. There have been speculations about whether Anna's mental breakdown was genuine or was a calculated move. Pleading insanity is a popular strategy that criminals may use to evade harsher judgments, and there is a theory that the 21-year-old may have managed to con her way into a lighter sentence. But whatever the case may be, Anna Leovic is still detained and won't be released to the general public for a long time, if ever again. Melie Manning was a vibrant young woman whose life was tragically cut short in a way that stunned an entire community. Her disappearance revealed a dark underworld that few dared to confront. What happened to Melie, and why? Ngatai Lynette Manning, better known as Melie Manning, was born in Nelson, New Zealand on February 6, 1981. Melie's childhood was a tough one, with her father walking out on her family when she was only young. Then a rough stepfather stepped into the lives of Melie and her siblings, further complicating her upbringing. This background led to behavioural issues. Her older sister Jasmine had similar issues too. Melie ended up going into foster care because of her poor behaviour, and when she was 14 years old, she dropped out of school. Melie also formed an illicit substance habit, something which she often used intravenously. By the time she was 15, Melie had begun selling her body to bring in money. Her life was spiralling quickly. She also began to commit crimes against others to support her habits. Melie ended up using a syringe full of her own fluids to jab a shop assistant while being involved in a robbery in 1999. This quite terrible act earned Melie a jail sentence of 18 months. She also did have additional prison sentences through the years for other offences. In July of 2008, Jasmine, who had lost touch with Melie after going into witness protection, sadly ended her own time on this earth. Jasmine's early demise impacted Melie heavily. She decided that she didn't want to end up like her sister. In an effort to straighten out her life to avoid the same fate as Jasmine, Melie decided to quit escorting and try to quit illicit substances with the help of a treatment program. Hoping to live a cleaner lifestyle, Melie was considering her next steps and thought about studying art. While she was weighing up her options, she was also planning to conceive a child with her significant other. During this time, she moved in with her mother. Despite her intentions to rebuild her life, living clean was difficult for Melie. She had lost her income when she stopped escorting, so now she was struggling with poverty too. The Christmas holiday season of 2008 was approaching, and Melie was unable to buy presents for her loved ones, all because the circumstances of her life had led up to this point. Melie, who was now 27 years old, decided she would return to escorting for one night only to make some money so she could buy presents. She didn't want to be a disappointment. At some point around this time, she also took some substances. These included morphine, methadone, and diazepam. On December the 18th, 2008, Melie travelled from the Riccarton suburb of Christchurch to Central Christchurch. Central Christchurch was known for its red light district, a place where escorts tried to find clients. Melie's regular spot when she was working the streets was an intersection of Peterborough and Manchester streets, and so that is where she headed that night, and she met with a client at 9:30 p.m. The client returned Melie to her street corner after their appointment was over. Another client arrived, and after that appointment, Melie returned to her corner at about 10:20 p.m. Another worker saw her at around 10:35 p.m, but she noticed that she was gone around 10 minutes later, and that was the last time that anyone saw Melie. Her body was sadly found at 6:50 a.m. the next day. It was located in the Avon River, when a runner saw what appeared to be legs in the river and flagged down a nearby kayaker to paddle over and take a closer look. Several weapons had been used in the crimes against Melie. She had been throttled, repeatedly jabbed, violated, and beaten viciously with a metal pole. Police were able to identify Melie based on her fingerprints. This was because of her prior run-ins with the law. They were able to quickly figure out that she had been working the street on the night of her murder, with many people reporting seeing her standing there in an eye-catching outfit, a bikini top with blue and white polka dots, a pink skirt, and a cardigan. Police learned the last text message she replied to was at 10:43 p.m, when she quickly responded to a message a client had sent her. There was nothing unusual about her reply, nothing that would suggest she was in any sort of danger or that she was scared. But when the client messaged Melie again, less than a minute later, her phone was no longer in service. Her watch had stopped working at 10:59 p.m. the night before. This was because of contact with the water, so police were able to pinpoint her time of death to a narrow window of time. In approximately just 16 minutes, Melie had been attacked, violated, her time on this earth ended, and her body dumped in the river. The investigators interviewed hundreds of people, and they received a list of Melie's clients, which was approximately 40 people long. Police were able to clear both of the clients that she had seen shortly before her demise. Witnesses reported a dark vehicle that was potentially linked to the crime because it was spotted near the place that she had been found, and at around the same time that the crime was believed to have happened. Police knew the murder wasn't a result of a robbery, because Melie's purse was still over her shoulder when she was found. There were a lot of possible people of interest in this case, including men who frequently picked up the local escorts. Despite many leads and an intense investigation by police, the trail of the killer grew cold. New Zealand police offered a $50,000 reward that would be given to anyone who provided information that resulted in an arrest. The December 31st, 2009 deadline for that reward passed without an arrest being made. police would occasionally announce new developments, keeping the crime fresh in people's minds. One announcement said that they had found grass seed on Melorie's cardigan and sent the seeds to Dallas Mildenhall, one of the world's top pollen scientists. Mildenhall noticed through his microscope that some of the seeds had a rare second pore, and so police asked him to examine grass samples from a place they had suspected as a possible murder location. In a stunning break in the case that was announced in December of 2010, the analysis of those seeds helped police pinpoint the location of the murder. Melie had been killed at a property on Galbraith Avenue. This was located in Avonside and was a known gang hangout. The hangout was used by the Mongrel Mob, the largest street gang in New Zealand. Although New Zealand is known overall as a safe country to live in, gangs are still a problem there. The Mongrel Mob was known to demand money from street workers as a kind of tax for working on any streets that they considered as theirs. Another escort told police that Mongrel Mob members were telling the women working the street that night to share their earnings with them, with the understanding that there would be consequences if they didn't. The gang members were forcing the working women to pay $20 each for each client they saw. Police began to look closely at the members of the gang because of the link to the crime scene. They suspected that more than one person was involved, partly because of the short time frame of the crime, and the moving of Melorie's body would have been hard to carry out with just one person. The case seemed to go cold though, and time continued to pass. On March 29, 2012, more than 3 years after Melorie's death, police finally made an arrest in the case. They charged Maua Fawcett, a 20-year-old Mongrel Mob prospect known on the streets as Muck Dog, with Melorie's murder. At the time of the murder, Fawcett was 21 years old. He resided in Christchurch and had ties to the property in Galbraith Avenue, the location where the murder had occurred. He wasn't officially a member of the gang at the time of Melorie's murder, but he had the gang's symbol, a bulldog, tattooed on his cheek in anticipation of becoming a full-fledged member. Police had zeroed in on him early in their investigation as a potential suspect because he made a confession stating that he was involved with the attack during intensive police interviews. Fawcett met with police 11 times for interviews during a 3-year stretch. In one of the interviews, Fawcett told police that Melie had been brought to the Galbraith Avenue property with the intention of carrying out a planned hit because she hadn't paid the debt that she allegedly owed the gang. Police believed that she was ended for this debt, although they weren't sure whether it was a $20 per fee client the gang was charging, or if it was an unpaid illicit substance debt. Fawcett, who was being initiated into the gang, said that he was supposed to carry out the attack, but according to his story, he wouldn't do it. During another interview, he said someone had given him a metal pole and instructed him to hit Melie with it. Fawcett told authorities that he closed his eyes and struck her as he'd been told.
No, I'm haunting Tom. I can feel it. I feel it every day. I try and hide it away too. It's just worse. It's worse and worse every time I think about it. Yeah.
In subsequent interviews, his story frequently changed, and at another point, he said he wasn't there at all when Melie was attacked.
From my head just going...
Just let it out. You've told me one story. Well, yeah. That you now tell me isn't true.
The confession that Fawcett made wasn't a slam dunk in the case against him, however. Some of his statements didn't match up to the facts of the case. For instance, he mentioned that Melie was stripped of her clothing during the attack, but when she was found, she was still wearing the majority of her clothes. It didn't seem too likely that her assailants put her clothing back on after the attack, especially within the very limited time frame. Other things he said to the police didn't match up with some of the witness accounts either, nor with Melorie's cell phone records. In total, Fawcett was questioned by police for 30 hours, spread out over 11 sessions over the span of 3 years. Even though his confession was considered coerced and inaccurate by some, authorities felt they had enough to proceed with the trial. On February 7, 2014, Fawcett's trial started, with him in charge of his own defence, assisted by a lawyer. Fawcett said that his confession had been coerced by the police, and he admitted that he might have been high when he made the statements. The prosecution presented no tangible evidence linking Fawcett to the crime other than this confession. There were no forensics linking him to Melie, no eyewitnesses placing him at the scene, and no weapons in his position or tied to him. In March of 2014, however, it was apparent that the juries didn't believe Fawcett's court statements, that he lied when he said he was involved in a heinous crime because they found him guilty. He received a sentence of life in prison, but had the potential to be granted parole after serving only 20 years. Despite the sentence, police didn't stop investigating because they believed that additional gang members also had a role in Melie's attack and demise. The mystery about who was responsible for this violent crime deepened. In August of 2017, a retrial was ordered in Fawcett's case by the Court of Appeal, with one of the reasons being that the court learned from expert testimony that Fawcett had a diagnosis of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a fact that wasn't brought up during his trial. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can happen when mothers drink alcohol during pregnancy, and it leaves people with lifelong disabilities. The disorder severely affected Fawcett's brain and memory, and it was discovered that when he wasn't able to remember something, he often just made up information to fill in the blanks. Even through the investigation and the interview process with Fawcett, police had noted how slow he was intellectually and how he seemed to have a difficult time in understanding things. The Court of Appeal acknowledged the fact that the jury may not have been convinced of Fawcett's guilt, even with the confession, if they knew about his impairment that greatly damaged his ability to give a true account or understand that he was being coerced. A High Court justice determined that Fawcett's incriminating statements were not going to be allowed in his new trial based on their unreliability. As a result, the court dismissed the case against him in 2021, and he was released from prison. To this day, Melie's murder remains unsolved, with no other arrests made.
I spend a lot of time in this office and I love saying hi and meeting new people. So if I can help you, or if I can help you figure out how you want to get involved on campus, please come by and let's talk.
Eve Carson was born on November the 19th, 1985, and grew up in Athens, Georgia. Athens is a vibrant college town. It blends historic charm, thriving arts, and a rich music scene. Maybe the most notable band that comes from there is REM. Everyone that knew Eve said she was warm-hearted and kind. She would always go out of her way to help others, and was known as the friend that was everyone's go-to when they needed someone to listen. Eve also had always excelled academically. At high school, she became class president, throwing herself into planning events and advocating for student issues. She was on the academic team too, and vice president at the National Honor Society. No one knew how Eve could take on so much, with many different people commenting on her generosity with her time. Even with all her commitments, she still volunteered as a peer educator at a safe house for runaway teenagers. When she graduated high school, Eve had left a mark on both the school and her community. Her passion for learning and leadership then took her to the University of North Carolina, otherwise known as UNC, at Chapel Hill. Here she continued to excel academically, while throwing herself into everything that campus life had to offer. Eve was just as magnetic at college as she had been in high school. She'd always greet everyone with a smile. Before long, Eve was involved in student government, community outreach programs, and more volunteer work. She was determined to make a difference where she could. She quickly gained the same reputation, even in this new unfamiliar town, as she had back home, as someone who was deeply driven and compassionate. Her infectious spirit drew people to her, and she became widely known across campus. In her sophomore year, Eve was invited to join a competitive merit-based scholarship, one that emphasized leadership, service, and character. It was a celebration of everything that Eve had achieved so far. As she progressed through college, her focus expanded to issues affecting the UNC campus itself. She began advocating for fairer tuition rates, knowing that financial challenges were a barrier for some students. Understanding the struggles faced by students and working in student government ultimately made Eve decide to run for student body president, and she won in a landslide.
With 3,639 votes, Eve Carson is the student body president of the University of Georgia.
Right after the announcement, Carson told us that all the hard work finally paid off. I look at it as the product of a lot of hard work and a really committed team. We put so much work into our ideas, into our research, and into just getting out there as much as possible to connect with students.
And so she poured herself into this new role, working long hours to fulfill her campaign promises and address students' concerns. As she always had, Eve also made sure that she committed herself fully to her studies. Even though she'd achieved so much, she never stopped thinking about what may come next. She started considering postgraduate programs, exploring ideas of public health, public policy, or law school so that she could continue making an impact on other people's lives. Eve brainstormed careers where she could blend scientific knowledge with her passion for service, daydreaming of medicine, or joining a humanitarian organization. She was only a year away from graduating and felt so excited at the prospect of her future. And so too did everyone around her, with her family, friends and professors all feeling proud. Everybody knew that Eve had big things ahead of her, which is why the events on the night of the 4th of March 2008 felt even more shocking, more heartbreaking. Eve's dreams would never be realized. After a night out with friends, Eve was heading to her car in Chapel Hill. Also out that night were two men named Demario James Atwater and Lawrence Alvin Leovic Jr., but they weren't out to have a good time. They weren't celebrating or relaxing. They were hunting for prey. Leovic and Atwater were friends, and on that night, a third friend, a man named Jason McNeil, had declined to join them. Leovic had wanted McNeil to drive he and Atwater around, not exactly an exciting prospect. So with the lack of a friend with a car, Leovic, who was on probation for burglary, instead took his own mother's car and drove with Atwater to Chapel Hill. The two were scoping the local area for a victim, someone that they could take from rather than working to achieve something for themselves. And that is when they saw Eve Carson. She was returning to her car, ready to go home after a night out. As she opened the car door, the two men came up behind her and forced her and themselves into the car. Leovic got into the driver's seat, whilst Atwater sat in the back holding Eve hostage. Eve understandably started shaking and crying. She pleaded with them to let her go. She told them that they could take anything of hers that they wanted, if they could just make sure that she got out of the car safely. Her captors drove her immediately to an ATM. First they went to one at University Mall in Chapel Hill, where they withdrew $700. They then went to another ATM in Durham, but they couldn't withdraw any more money. Eve tried to reason with them both. She said that they didn't need to do what they were doing. She still couldn't stop crying. This was so far from the world that she knew. She started pleading with them to take her back to campus. After all, they had the money, and this must have been the reason that they were doing this. But Eve's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. After the second attempt at the ATM, Leovic and Atwater started driving to a wooded neighborhood. This was about a mile from campus. At this moment, Eve started to realize how unlikely it was that they were just going to let her go. The trees at this location were thick and tightly packed together. Eve begged them over and over again to turn around. But Leovic and Atwater had already made their choice. Eve had seen both of their faces, and they didn't trust that she wouldn't immediately report them for the armed robbery. And Leovic was on probation after all. If he got caught now, he'll be going away for a very, very long time. As the car slowed to a halt, there was darkness all around them. The firearm was still at Eve's head. She quietly realized what was about to happen. She knew that she couldn't change their minds, that even with all of her finely honed communication skills, they wouldn't help now, not with these people. So incredibly, Eve stopped asking for them to let her go, but instead she asked if the two would pray with her, seeking some form of solace in what she believed was some of her final moments. Please, she begged. Eve couldn't stop her body shaking. They made her walk deeper and deeper into the woods, tears streaming down her cheeks. Eve was thinking of all the dreams ahead of her that she still wanted to fulfill. She asked the pair one more time not to do this. Instead of answering her though, Lovett and Atwater instead pulled the trigger 5 times whilst aimed directly at her. During the first 4, Eve was still alive, witnessing her own demise in real time. They targeted her right shoulder, her right upper arm, right buttock, and right cheek. Vital fluids in her lungs showed she was still breathing at this point. Eve had spent her whole life trying to protect other people, and she knew that in this moment, the only small chance she had would be to protect herself too. The final shot was fired. Eve raised her right hand in self-defense, but instead of it stopping the bullet, it went straight through to her right temple and then her brain. There was nothing more she could do. In that instant, all of Eve's dreams disappeared. Lovett and Atwater left her body behind. However, they did take her bank card as they ran back to her car. They then drove as fast as they could away from the scene. It wasn't long until a woman who lived close by reported hearing gunshots to the police. They immediately drove to the area that the woman described, and after combing through the woods for a short while, there they found Eve, laying cold on the ground. Authorities contacted the Carson family to let them know what had happened. Eve's parents refused to believe the police at first. How could this be the same daughter who had done so much, yet still had so much ahead of her? They were silent with shock. Likewise, as the news spread, students on campus were devastated. Eve's friends, family, and classmates struggled to comprehend the senselessness of her death. Her absence was instantly deeply felt. In the meantime, the Chapel Hill Police Department acted quickly. They could feel the weight of the tragedy immediately bearing down onto them. Police knew that they would be under pressure not only to deliver justice, but to help a grieving community make sense of the seemingly nonsensical. People were fearful knowing that the killers were still at large. Could this happen again? Could this happen to them? The first priority was to piece together the events of the night. The reports of the gunshot were made in the early morning, and other neighbours, when interviewed, also mentioned that they'd seen a car, one that seemed like it didn't belong in the area. Officers began a systematic search for evidence, and investigators canvassed nearby areas for potential witnesses, or for any footage that may shed more light onto Eve's final hours. It would be greed that would reveal the first breakthrough in the case. It was the withdrawals from the ATM that Lovett and Atwater made that became the first big lead in the case. They traced the withdrawals made from Eve's cards back to 2 ATM locations, and then they tracked down the CCTV. It showed 2 individuals in the car with Eve, and it showed them using her card to withdraw money. Although the images were grainy, there was enough that they could go on. The images were released to the public, asking anyone who had any information to come forward immediately. And then the next break came from the calls that started pouring in following the footage's release. One tip led them to Atwater, who had previous encounters with the police, and his appearance matched one of the men in the ATM footage. Following the lead, the police dug more into Atwater's background and friends. This took them directly to Lovett, who also fit the second man on the tapes. The police held their breath. They knew now they were getting very close. But every day they also saw the community still grieving for Eve. They knew that they couldn't get this wrong. Carefully, behind closed doors, the police began to build a case. On March 12, 2008, Atwater was charged with first-degree murder. He was 21 years old at the time. The next day, Lovett, 17, was also arrested. There was a sense of relief, a sense that justice may be served. The court appearances were somber, however. The age of the men made everything even more senseless. It seemed their lives were the complete opposite of Eve Carson. Atwater pled guilty, receiving life in prison plus 30 years. He apologised in court to Eve's parents, turning to them and saying, "No matter what the court did today, it would be far from anything I should receive." Eve's parents couldn't speak during the hearing. They were still in disbelief that the young man in front of them was the very same person that had ended their daughter's life. Although Lovett pleaded not guilty, the jury found him otherwise. Lovett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community rallied together to honour Eve's memory. Vigils were held on campus before and after the sentencing, and there memories of Eve were shared, of all the times she had helped and inspired other people. A scholarship was started in her name, so that her legacy could continue to support future generations of students. And in the years since, that legacy has only grown. In 2009, an American Idol finalist who was a friend of Eve talked about how her faith in him had pushed him to the audition, even though she was no longer around. This contestant was a man named Anup Desai, otherwise known as Totem. An annual Memorial 5K is also held in her honour. It raises money each year for charity. Her university also dedicated a garden to Eve and to other students who passed away before their graduation. I think from what we know about Eve, that seems very much something she would have wanted, not to take the limelight for herself, but to share it with other lost souls. In that garden, people can sit in quiet peace, listen to birdsong, or look at the monument with the words inscribed on it, learned from every single being, experience, and moment. In many small ways, Eve does live on.
I realized, what I just did was so fun.
Katrina Rivero was born on the 25th of March, 1986. In December of 2016, she was living in Bakersfield, California. She was the 30-year-old mother of 2 and 39 weeks pregnant with her third child. It was to be a baby boy she had already named Josiah. He was due just 2 days before Christmas, an incredibly exciting time. Katrina was described by her friends and family as having a true talent for making people smile, and for bringing an element of light to any situation. She was known to be extremely giving, and had a passion to truly help those in need. And this is exactly what she was doing for her on-again, off-again boyfriend, 28-year-old Manuel Vela. Manuel was well known to suffer with mental health concerns as well as substance issues. But Katrina was devoted to helping him through these struggles. That is, despite the violent way that he was known to treat her. Katrina was devoted to her religion and strongly believed in forgiveness. She was doing her best to help Manuel through his mental health concerns and substance addictions. That is, rather than leave him because of it. The couple began dating in 2009, and between October 2008 and June 2016, Manuel had caught various criminal charges. In 2008, he was arrested for stealing a car. However, since he resisted his arrest, more charges were added. In September of 2009, he was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct and false identification to officials. Not even a month after this, he was arrested again for domestic battery. He served 53 days in jail for this occurrence. In 2012, he was arrested for trespassing on someone's property, and he served 32 days in jail for this charge. A month later, he was arrested again for resisting officers and medical staff. This was after he was found drunk and acting disorderly. He was soon arrested once again for battery and served another 24 days. In July of 2013, he was arrested once again for domestic battery, willful cruelty to a child, and false imprisonment. He served another 90 days for these charges. In July of 2014, he was arrested again for drunk and disorderly conduct. Then, a month later, he was arrested for taking a vehicle without the owner's consent. He was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months for this, but he only served 246 days, spending his sentence between Wasco Prison and Patton State Hospital. Katrina filed a restraining order against Manuel. It expired a year later, but she never renewed it. When he got out of jail, Manuel was arrested again in June of 2016 for inflicting corporal injury on his partner and for violating his post-release supervision. For this, he went straight back to jail and served another 17 days. And then just a few months later, on Thursday, December the 8th, 2016, Katrina was reported missing. One of her daughters claimed that she last saw her mother getting into Manuel's car on that day. Police immediately suspected Manuel Vela as the perpetrator. They began searching for Katrina and attempted to locate Manuel through cell phone pings, but they were unable to find either of them. It wasn't until 11:25 a.m. on Saturday morning that a witness reported seeing Manuel at his apartment complex on the 2500 block of Haley Street. Manuel fled when police arrived and attempted to apprehend him, and this led to a chase. It was described as a slow speed chase, only reaching speeds of around 35 miles per hour. However, Manuel was driving on the wrong side of the street, and he hit numerous cars in his maroon 2000 Hyundai Elantra. He was initially weaving through traffic, holding a tire iron out of his window. He was hitting parked cars with it as he passed, but he was also attempting to hit several California Highway Patrol officers.
He attempted to strike a control-3 vehicle, correction, Coastal 3 officer at about 35 miles an hour, accelerated towards them.
After a while, though, he began holding baby Josiah out of the driver's side window. A California Highway Patrol officer managed to lay down a spike strip in the middle of the road. Manuel veered to avoid the spike strip and attempted to hit the officer. He missed and ended up puncturing 2 of his tires. The police chase ended at the corner of Mount Vernon and Flower Street, near East Bakersfield High School and Kern Medical Center, where Manuel got out of the car, holding Josiah as a shield so officers wouldn't open fire. Eventually, he dropped the baby in the street and tried to run, but the officers chased him and tackled him with the assistance of canines. They found Katrina's body in the back seat of Manuel's car. Her crimson red vital fluids were soaked into the seat. Emergency services tried to perform life-saving treatment on Josiah. He was rushed to nearby Kern Medical Center, but he did not survive. It's worth noting here that baby Josiah was not yet born. Manuel cut him from Katrina's womb. Truly one of the darkest things I have ever seen. During his bizarre police interview, Manuel tried to suggest that Katrina knew he was going to kill her and that she was okay with it. Here are some excerpts from his interview.
12/8, that's when this all started, about how this person ended up dead, Katrina Rivero, with the baby cut out. And
Did you cut the baby out of her?
yes, I did.
Why?
Prove a point to religion. She said, I'm gonna die in 2016. Her grandma knew. Everybody was telling him and warning him everything. You're gonna die by his hands if you don't get away from him. This is talking to the higher powers, not the 4 founding fathers of his nation or Islam or any
It's present time, right now.
capable 7 nations of any religion. We had to give them, because we're all as one. This is king of all kings, the city. I socked her and I choked her.
And then the baby. Once you cut the baby out, how did you kill the baby?
I killed her, Katrina Rivero, right there.
How?
I strangled her.
At the house?
Yes. Put her in the trunk. Put her in the back seat of the car. Drive, have some alone time, talk to the father, and then go on and proceed. And I was do as I chose as a human.
And then hours later you went to Edison and then cut the baby out?
Yes.
He said that day he began arguing with Katrina about kids and going to the store for cigarettes, and she told him that she didn't want to be with him anymore. That evening, he hit her on the chin, knocking her to the ground. He then held his hands to her neck for 5 minutes, ensuring that her time on this earth had come to an end. He then placed her body in the back of his car and began driving around. After 6 or 7 hours of driving around, he used a box cutter to remove Josiah from her body. The box cutter was found inside Katrina during her autopsy. Manuel was represented by Chief Deputy Public Defender Peter Kang during his first hearing. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, reckless evading of police officers, obstructing/resisting an executive officer, and assault on a child resulting in great bodily harm. He was being held in jail without bond, and he had a competency hearing scheduled for January the 20th of the following year. At his hearing, Manuel called out, "I am guilty," though this contradicts statements from his jailhouse interview with the media, during which he claimed, "I didn't kill the baby. I had some personal time with him. He looks just like me." The autopsies revealed that Katrina's cause of death was neck compression, and Josiah's cause of death was asphyxia. A funeral for Katrina and Josiah was held the same day as Manuel's second arraignment. Afterwards, a vigil was held for Katrina and Josiah near East High School. At this vigil, Katrina's cousin, Yvette Monroe, told news reporters, "The last thing I told her was that Jesus loves her, and she said, 'I know.'" Manuel's sister told investigators that her brother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Someone else who knew Manuel said that he had recently talked about the need to sacrifice someone to ISIS. A woman named Nadine Escalante, who worked at a juvenile hall that Manuel had attended when he was younger, recounted that Manuel Vela was liked before he committed these crimes. She said that he continually made his way to the juvenile hall as a teenager, and that his substance misuse would exacerbate his underlying mental health issues. Nadine said, "Though how I met him wasn't under the best circumstances, he had a good heart. He knew he was in trouble. He knew this time it was really, really bad."
A perfect example of drugs and mental illness. They do not mix. And when you put those two together, it is a master plan of disaster.
Manuel had attempted to reconnect with Nadine, calling her just 3 weeks before the murders, but she wasn't able to talk at the time. She said, "I sit here and think, what if that phone call would have changed what happened? He was a good boy, and we don't know what happened." Because of this incident, Nadine and some friends are in the process of starting a domestic maltreatment support group that focuses on community healing to try to prevent anything like this from happening again. But before Manuel Vela could attend his next hearing, about a month after his arrest, he was found unresponsive, swinging in his single-person cell. Staff at the jail attempted life-saving measures, but he could not be saved. Wilma Anderson, a 17-year-old resident of Sweden, possessed the promise of a bright future. With her glowing long blonde hair and a radiant smile, she seemed to captivate everyone around her. The world was at her fingertips, brimming with endless possibilities. When Wilma was allegedly just 15 years old, she entered into a relationship with someone 6 years her senior. The man was reportedly 21 years old when they started dating, which just seems totally illegal. However, in Sweden, the age of consent is 15. So in this circumstance, it appears that no crime was yet committed. This 21-year-old man was a Swedish Kurdish man named Tishko Ahmed Shabazz. Shabazz, originally from Iraq, had obtained Swedish citizenship in 2014. One thing we need to know about Shabazz, something that will become very relevant later on, is that he was completely obsessed with Donald Trump. Exactly how this obsession started, we don't know. Sweden could not be further from the US in terms of geography or politics. His obsession, though, was so great that he even tried to go to the US to campaign on behalf of Trump. However, his application to do so was denied as he didn't have the right paperwork. Shabazz lived in Uddevalla, which is a town located between Gothenburg and Oslo. The relationship between Wilma and Shabazz seemed good to begin with, but it started to degrade over time. By the time Wilma was 17 and Shabazz was 23, it was in tatters. Shabazz started to create some strange conspiracies aimed at Wilma, the young woman he was supposed to love. In the lead up to the 2020 US elections, Shabazz began to unravel completely. He believed that Wilma was in some way satanic, and to make this delusion even worse, things somehow got intertwined with US politics. Shabazz believed that Wilma was some kind of agent for Joe Biden's Democrats, the man that was running against his hero, Donald Trump. It appears that this was too much for their relationship to bear. Shabazz believed that Wilma bore some of the responsibility for how Trump was polling. Their relationship of over 2 years could not stand the strain, and the couple went their separate ways. However, Shabazz could not let go of what he thought Wilma had done to Trump and the Republicans. He was convinced that 17-year-old Swedish Wilma Anderson was a satanic Democratic agent. On November the 14th, 2019, Wilma reluctantly made her way to her ex-boyfriend's house to retrieve her belongings that she had left behind following the breakup. Although it was a task she would rather have avoided, it was the only way that she could repossess her belongings still in Shabaz's house. But after this visit to retrieve her belongings, Wilma mysteriously vanished. Growing increasingly concerned for her safety and unable to locate her themselves, Wilma's loved ones reported her missing to the police 3 days later. It was now November the 17th, 2019. When Wilma's parents heard of her disappearance, they reached out to ex-Shabaz. When they initially interviewed him, he assured them that Wilma had left his house and that she was in good health when she departed. However, he denied having any knowledge of her whereabouts now, or having had any contact with her since that time. Yet strangely, he said Wilma's coat and handbag were still at his apartment. This led authorities to start doubting his claims. Wilma's sudden disappearance left her family and friends deeply worried, and now they were stuck, desperately searching for answers. Her loved ones were left trying to uncover any information that could lead to her safe return home. Authorities initiated an investigation into her disappearance, hoping to unravel the mystery surrounding her supposed vanishing act. As the investigation progressed, Wilma's loved ones still held on to hope, simply praying for her safe return. They anxiously awaited any developments that may shed light on her whereabouts and bring her back home. As word spread of Wilma's disappearance, the community rallied together to assist in search efforts. Hundreds of dedicated volunteers joined forces, determined to find any trace of Wilma's whereabouts. In a remarkable display of solidarity, people from all walks of life came forward, offering their time and resources to aid in the search. Amazingly, in total, over 5,000 people were involved in the search. This made it one of Sweden's largest ever search operations. The local police in Sweden were fully committed to finding Wilma. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, they employed various means to cover all areas possible. Divers were deployed to search bodies of water, while a mini submarine was utilized to explore underwater locations that were otherwise inaccessible. Amidst the extensive search operation, Wilma's loved ones refused to give in to despair. They held on to the belief that she was still alive despite the passing of time. Every passing minute, however, brought a growing sense of foreboding. The outlook became increasingly grim as hours turned into days, casting a shadow of uncertainty and concern over the community. On November 28, 2019, Swedish authorities searched Shabaz's apartment in their desperate search for Wilma. She had now been missing for more than 10 days. As the crime scene investigators meticulously combed through every inch of Shabaz's apartment, their initial efforts seemed to yield no sign of Wilma's presence. However, just as they were preparing to conclude the search, a seemingly insignificant travel bag captured the investigators' attention. Curiosity piqued, they carefully inspected the bag, hoping it might hold valuable clues regarding Wilma's whereabouts. The crime scene investigators approached the travel bag with caution. Slowly, they opened it, unsure of what they may find inside. Horror washed over them as the bag revealed its contents. There, nestled within, was a shocking and gruesome discovery. A human head, wrapped meticulously in tape and aluminium foil. A true horror lay before them. Investigators quickly identified the victim as Wilma. After this unimaginable discovery, a discovery that dashed the hopes of a family and a nation, further investigation of the property was carried out. During their meticulous search, the crime scene investigators found red vital fluid on the floor, suggesting a desperate struggle had taken place. In addition, a large, sharp kitchen implement was discovered, and this raised suspicion as to what had gone on in the home. The investigators promptly sent the knife for testing, and the results, perhaps predictably, came back positive for traces of Wilma's DNA. Later, the prosecutors involved in the investigation of Wilma's case made a chilling revelation. They concluded that Wilma was a victim of a heinous act of repeated violence, suggesting a brutal and savage attack. The weight of evidence clearly pointed towards Shabaz as the prime suspect in Wilma's murder. Therefore, the authorities wasted no time in apprehending him immediately after the horrifying discovery at his apartment. After his arrest, he absolutely denied any involvement, blaming the passing of his ex-girlfriend somehow on the Swedish authorities. He claimed that he loved her deeply and that he had always led a flawless life, always abiding by the law. However, the investigation took a turn when detectives interviewed his neighbours. They revealed that they had heard some disturbing screams, these bone-chilling noises suspiciously emanating from his apartment on the very same night that Wilma had disappeared. Even though the police knew that Wilma was deceased, their determination to find her body remained unwavering. The rest of her remains could hold further evidence to aid this investigation, and of course the Anderson family deserved closure for their beloved Wilma. Their discovery of the head had already served as a grim confirmation of her tragic fate. However, rather than giving up, the police continued their relentless search. Amidst this harrowing situation, Wilma's relatives called upon the citizens of Sweden to join them in their quest. They pleaded with the public not to lose hope and to continue searching for any trace of Wilma. In a heart-wrenching plea to the Swedish media, her mother expressed the family's anguish and desperation. She emphasized the importance of finding Wilma. A translation of her words say, "We want to find our daughter and sister. It is completely inhumane that we are going through this. Please do not stop looking for Wilma. I hope people are observant if they see something apparent in water or terrain, that people have their eyes open." By December 2019, the search for Wilma's body had attracted a significant number of volunteers. Almost 3 weeks after she was first reported missing, approximately 5,000 individuals had joined in the search efforts to locate her remains. The community had come together, demonstrating their commitment to Wilma and her family. In May 2020, Tishko Shabazz faced serious criminal charges of murder and desecration of human remains. Despite the accusation's gravity and the overwhelming evidence, Shabazz pleaded not guilty to all charges brought against him. During the summer of 2020, the Swedish National Board of Forensic Medicine conducted an assessment on Tishko's mental health. The finding reveals that he did not exhibit any signs of a severe or debilitating mental illness. Instead, experts identified certain personality traits commonly associated with narcissism, which can be attributed instead to a narcissistic personality disorder. His behavior displayed characteristics such as grandiosity and an inflated sense of self-importance, typical of individuals with this disorder. Remember, this man seemed to believe his presence could have helped Trump to win the 2020 election. These negative traits seemed to be particularly prominent in Shabazz's demeanor. During the trial, despite the mounting evidence against him, he still adamantly maintained his innocence, and he repeatedly denied playing any role in the murder of Wilma. However, the Swedish District Court reached a different conclusion. On July 27, 2020, Shabazz was found guilty of murder and violating Wilma's remains. The gravity of his crime was reflected in the court's decision to sentence Tishko to life imprisonment. In addition to the life sentence, the court ordered Tishko to pay €22,000 to Wilma's grieving family. Even after the conclusion of his trial, Shabazz stubbornly persisted in proclaiming his innocence. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the court's verdict, he continued to maintain that he had nothing to do with Wilma's tragic death. This unwavering denial only added to the anguish and frustration experienced by Wilma's family and the community at large. Despite being sentenced to life in prison, the Court of Appeal for Western Sweden lowered his sentence from life in prison to just 18 years for Wilma's murder. Kayla Brown was born on November 17, 1985, in Anderson, South Carolina. Anderson, an affordable small city to live in, has plenty of sunny days and a lot of rural areas to explore. It's located in Spartanburg County, which is on South Carolina's northwest border. By the time she had reached adulthood, Kayla had put down roots in the area that she was born in, and she spent the next few years working various jobs in an effort to support herself. During this time, she met a man named Charles David Carver. Charles was going through a divorce, and he and Kayla instantly hit it off. Like Kayla, Charles had also been born in Anderson, and he was just 2 years older than she was. He worked as a printing machine operator at a local business. It was said that Charles had a winning personality, and he loved joking around and making people smile. Kayla appreciated his light-hearted and easygoing attitude towards life, and within a few months of starting their romance, Kayla and Charles had already moved in together and were fully dedicated to their new relationship. Like many couples in their early years, they appreciated having some extra income to help with their general finances. Existing is pretty expensive. So in 2016, to help with their finances, Kayla decided to take a job cleaning houses for a man named Todd Kohlhepp. Kohlhepp lived in a near 100-acre rural property in Spartanburg County. Although they weren't close, Todd had been one of Kayla's Facebook friends for years. Kohlhepp was a fairly well-known person in Spartanburg County. This was since he was a real estate agent who was doing quite well for himself. So with his successful career in property, it made sense that he might need help cleaning homes, for instance, so they would be ready for listing on the market. During the next 3 months, Kayla cleaned approximately 4 or 5 homes under Todd's employment. To make the jobs go faster, she brought Charles along with her so the two of them could clean the homes together. During this time, Todd was nice and polite to the couple, just as a professional in his field of work would be expected to be. In August of 2016, Todd told Kayla he had another cleaning and maintenance job for the couple, but unlike the other jobs, this one would be his own personal property. When the two of them got there on August the 31st, Kohlhepp had to come out and unlock the gate alongside the road that safeguarded his property. As Kayla and Charles got past the gate, Todd then locked it behind them. Kayla just assumed this move was to keep any animals that he might own from roaming off of his rural and rather isolated property. So after entering the property, Kohlhepp led the couple to a secluded and roomy 2-story garage. This was situated nearly a mile away from the road. He provided the couple with hedge clippers and bottles of water and said that he needed some underbrush and weeds removed from a nearby trail. When the couple walked outside the garage ready to get to work, Kohlhepp said he had to go back inside to grab something and that he would be right back. And when Todd Kohlhepp came back outside, he was holding a firearm. As soon as he walked outside the garage, Kohlhepp immediately pulled the trigger whilst aimed at Charles 3 times. He was struck in the chest, ending his time on this earth. It took a moment for what had just happened to register with Kayla. An ordinary day had just turned into a horrific nightmare. Everything seemed utterly surreal. Right after calmly shooting Charles, Kohlhepp grabbed Kayla. He dragged her inside and cuffed her by the hands and feet. He told her that if she didn't cooperate with him, that she would share the same fate as Charles. She was then moved to a small storage container nearby, and once there, she was chained by the neck. The storage container was extremely hot and completely dark when the door was closed. Kohlhepp left her in there alone for a few hours before finally returning. Kayla was told if she tried to run or fight back, that he would end her life as well. And then Kohlhepp disgustingly violated her. As days passed, loved ones of Kayla and Charles noticed they weren't returning any text messages or phone calls that were sent to them. Panic started to set in. What could have happened to the beloved couple? The families eventually contacted the police and let them know that Kayla and Charles were believed to be missing. Family and friends were puzzled. They found odd posts that began showing up on the couple's social media accounts. The posts seemed to imply the two of them had gotten married, bought a home, and were doing well. But if they were safe and well, why were neither Kayla nor Charles returning any of the messages sent by their loved ones? The situation seemed to be growing increasingly strange. Authorities did search for the couple, but seemingly they could turn up no concrete leads. In the weeks that followed, authorities had tracked the last cell phone signal that Kayla had to a general area in Spartanburg County, and they discovered from Facebook records that the couple had been taking odd jobs from Todd Kohlhepp. They noticed that his land was in the general area where Kayla's last signal came from, so investigators obtained a search warrant for Todd's property. On November 3rd, 2016, police arrived at the property and heard banging emanating from a shipping container, and it was there they found Kayla, still chained around the neck. Police would say she was chained up like a dog. For all of this time, Kayla had been held captive, and she was repeatedly violated by Kohlhepp. This ordeal lasted for 2 months before she was finally discovered by authorities. Kayla immediately told police that Charles had passed away after Kohlhepp had shot him. Kayla also informed authorities that Kohlhepp had once walked her to 3 apparent graves that he had dug for other victims on his property. He told her that if she attempted to escape, there would be another grave for her. Kayla was freed from her metal prison after authorities worked to remove the chains, and Kohlhepp was soon arrested for abducting her and for causing Charles's death.
Okay, so you're searching my house and my car. Okay. He's got a copy of the search warrants. He'll show you the copy. He'll show them to you, and he'll leave you a copy. Taz, she's gonna pee.
No. Nervous.
Do you want to help yourself and tell me where the body's at so we can go recover Charlie's body?
No, sir.
You don't want to?
No, sir.
Okay. Why'd you shoot him?
I didn't shoot anybody, sir.
Okay, why'd you lock her in a container in your property?
I was talking about.
She's on your property right now, locked in a container. They just got her out of they called it a
shipping container.
Connex box. She was locked in a container in a Connex box. They got her.
After his arrest, more shocking discoveries were made on his property, bringing national attention to the case. 2 more deceased victims were found and identified as Johnny Joe Coxey, who was 29 when he went missing, and his wife, Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, who was in her mid-20s at the time of her disappearance. As a result of the search warrant, many weapons were found on Kohlhepp's property by authorities. These included semi-automatic rifles and pistols fitted with suppressors. It's believed that Kohlhepp bought the weapons through illegal means, because he was unable to buy them for himself because of a past offence. Authorities would discover that Kohlhepp already had a serious criminal history and a long indication of troubling behaviour trailing back to before Kayla and Charles went missing. In 1987, when he was just 15 years old and living in Arizona, he was arrested and convicted of the kidnapping and violation of a girl, someone who was only 14 years old at the time. When he was sentenced, I guess coincidentally, to 14 years in prison for that crime, the judge had noted that Kohlhepp had displayed dangerous and aggressive behaviour, and he had been doing so since he was a little boy, and that this behaviour didn't seem to be improving. Even at a young age, there were plenty of signs that Kohlhepp might present a danger to others. During his interaction with the juvenile court system, a psychiatric evaluation was completed on him as a result of the crime he committed when he was a teenager. That evaluation noted all kinds of disturbing behaviour that Kohlhepp had displayed throughout his childhood. This included using a BB gun to shoot a dog, killing a fish with Clorox, purposely ruining other children's projects, and even using a hammer to destroy items in his own bedroom. As a result of that crime and the sentence he served, Kohlhepp had to register as a sex offender, and this continued even when he later relocated to South Carolina. But it's unclear how many people he interacted with in South Carolina actually knew about his checkered past. After Kayla was found and Kohlhepp was arrested, authorities told him that they had found Kayla on his property. Now captured by the police, Kohlhepp agreed to confess to ending the lives of other victims, but only if authorities followed his requests. And his requests were that he would be allowed to speak with his mother and break the news to her about his crimes, to give his mother a picture, and to move money to a friend's child's college fund. The authorities complied with these requests, and then Todd Kohlhepp did indeed admit to the kidnappings and killings. But police got much more than they bargained for. Kohlhepp confessed to the still unsolved murders of 4 people: Scott Ponder, Brian Lucas, Chris Sherbert, and Beverly Guy, all of whom were found at a business called Superbike Motorsports on November 6, 2003 in Chesney, South Carolina. Chesney is a very small town located in Spartanburg and Cherokee counties, so the quadruple murder shocked everyone who lived there. Kohlhepp had been a customer of Superbike Motorsports before the 4 workers were deceased, but he had never been a person of interest or even questioned in the case. Until, that is, authorities figured out he was responsible for Charles Carver's death on his property and for his crimes against Kayla. Although authorities had allegedly previously contacted Kohlhepp to ask questions about the Superbike Motorsports murders shortly after they happened, he supposedly simply never returned their calls. It's absolutely crazy to me that this man got away with murder by simply not returning a phone call. Anyway, investigators noted that many former customers of Superbike Motorsports also didn't contact authorities as they were asked to, so Kohlhepp's reluctance to speak to them didn't really raise any concerns. Authorities ran background checks on the customers of the motorbike showroom, but they said that those checks didn't reveal any indications that any of them would commit a crime of this magnitude. It was later learned that Kohlhepp had an issue with the shop after he bought a motorcycle there on April 16, 2003. The bike was stolen soon after he bought it, and he made statements that he believed that Superbike Motorsports was involved, although there was no evidence that this was the case. Kohlhepp said that he also felt that employees of the shop were rude to him, so he decided to bide his time and get his revenge. During his confession, he provided police with details of the crime they hadn't released to the public, further supporting his claim that he was responsible for it. He explained without remorse or feeling how the whole ordeal unfolded. But Kohlhepp wasn't done yet. He also confessed to killing Johnny Coxey and Megan McCraw Coxey, the other deceased people who had been found on his property. The Coxeys were a couple who lived in Spartanburg, and police were notified on December 22nd, 2015 that they too were missing. Kohlhepp had hired them too to do some odd jobs at his property. And also, like Charles, Johnny Coxey had been killed first, while Megan was kept alive for approximately 1 week longer. By the time the investigation had concluded, Todd Kohlhepp's list of unknown murdered victims had grown to 7, although he has since claimed that there are additional victims that police have just not yet found or linked to him. Kohlhepp faced plenty of charges in court. This included 4 counts of murder for the shootings of the 4 employees, and 3 more counts of murder for the Coxeys and Charles. He was also charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, multiple counts of possession of a weapon that was used during a violent crime, and more. Since he was facing potential capital punishment, Kohlhepp agreed to take a plea bargain to avoid receiving the death penalty. He pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including 7 counts of murder on May 26, 2017. Kohlhepp received a sentence of 7 consecutive life sentences, with no possibility of parole. After Todd Kohlhepp received this sentence, Kayla began working hard to put the trauma she had experienced beside her. In 2018, she was awarded $6.3 million in damages as part of a lawsuit filed against Todd Kohlhepp's estate. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? What do you think could possibly be done to avoid something like this happening again in the future? And if your child was given money for college by someone like Todd Kohlhepp, would you accept it? Let me know down in the comments. Remember, I'm uploading daily until the end of the year, but for now, be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.